You close your eyes and imagine a world without electricity, without the soft hum of traffic in the distance, without even the faint glow of a city on the horizon. Instead, there is only the vast quiet of early human farming villages. This is the Neolithic world, around 10,000 years ago, where humans had just begun to settle into permanent homes, exchanging the restless wandering of hunting and gathering for the steady rhythm of agriculture. And in this world, the bed was not a bed as you know it today. It was something far simpler, humbler, and yet deeply connected to the rhythms of survival. The ground beneath the body. For many early farmers, the first bed was nothing more than the earth itself. Packed soil, smoothed down by countless footsteps during the day, became a place of rest by night. The floor of a hut might be swept clean of pebbles and debris, but it remained firm, unyielding, and cold once the sun had set. Yet, lying directly on the soil was not comfortable, nor was it always safe. Insects, moisture, and drafts crept in, so people began to add a barrier between themselves and the earth, and that layer was often straw. Straw, the hollow stalks left behind after harvesting grain, was one of the first true sleeping surfaces of early farmers. It was plentiful, cheap, and easily replaced. After the harvest of barley or wheat, straw was swept into piles, spread across the packed floors of huts, and used as bedding. It was not soft in the way a mattress is today. It crinkled, it scratched, but it insulated the body from the chill of the earth, and it allowed weary farmers to rest. You can almost hear it, the faint rustle of stalks as a tired figure lowers themselves into the straw at the end of a long day. The long day before sleep. For the Neolithic farmer, sleep did not come easily or quickly. The body was sore from bending over fields, from digging with primitive tools, from tending to animals. The skin was marked by the sun, and the hands carried small cuts from reeds and grasses. The day had been filled with labor, planting seeds, grinding grain, fetching water, mending baskets. And so, when the time came to lie down, the simple act of resting on straw carried with it a heavy relief. But the hut was never silent. The fire smoldered low, casting faint smoke into the air. Chickens rustled in baskets. Goats bleated softly nearby. Families often slept together, pressed closely for warmth, breathing in the same thick air of their one-room dwelling. The bed of straw was not private. It was shared by parents, children, perhaps even the family dog, and it was temporary. Within a few weeks, the straw would flatten, grow damp, or collect insects. Then it would be swept out, burned as fuel, or used in the fields as manure. Fresh straw would be laid down and the cycle continued. The forgotten comforts of plant beds. Archaeological evidence tells us that in some places, Neolithic farmers experimented with more than just straw. In certain huts in Africa, layers of grasses were carefully arranged, sometimes with aromatic leaves placed on top. These leaves, such as those from insect-repelling plants, released faint scents that kept mosquitoes and other pests away. This was perhaps the first form of a mattress, though it was far from permanent. Over time, dirt, ash, and charcoal from the hearth would be sprinkled over the bedding, helping to keep away fleas. These were the quiet, boring details of daily survival, details forgotten in most grand histories, yet central to the way people lived. Imagine lying there yourself, the faint smell of dried herbs mixing with the smoky air of the hearth, the roughness of straw beneath your body, the sound of your neighbors shifting nearby, the distant bark of a dog outside the hut. It is a picture of rest, but not of comfort in the modern sense. Darkness, silence, and dreams. The night stretched longer than ours. Without electricity, the Neolithic farmer's day ended when the sun set, and sleep often came in two phases. People would lie down shortly after dusk, rising again around midnight. This first sleep was a deep, heavy rest, followed by a period of wakefulness in the night, sometimes used for tending the fire, whispering, or even stepping outside beneath the stars. Then a second sleep carried them until dawn. Upon the straw, this rhythm of two sleeps became the pattern of life, a forgotten habit, a forgotten way of resting, lost in our modern age of continuous light. The unanswered question. And so, you picture them, early farmers lying upon their straw, bodies pressed close, drifting into a sleep broken by the sounds of animals, the crackle of fire, and the cold of the night air seeping in through walls of mud and reed. But here, a question lingers, one rarely asked, one almost boring in its simplicity. Did these early farmers dream more vividly because of the herbs in their bedding, the smoke in the air, or the stillness of the world around them? No one can say for certain. Section 2. Sleeping on straw. The quiet rest of Neolithic farmers. When you think of sleep today, you imagine a soft mattress, perhaps a blanket, a pillow beneath your head, and the steady rhythm of silence or a chosen sound. But for the first farming communities, the act of resting was shaped not by choice, but by necessity, and so the story of their forgotten beds continues, not in comfort, but in adaptation. The straw bed as part of the house. The Neolithic home was small, often a single room built from mud brick, stone, or wattle and daub. The floor was hard earth, stamped flat by years of use. In such a space, every item mattered. The hearth for cooking, the pots for storing grain, the tools stacked neatly in corners, and then the straw bed. Unlike a modern bed, it was not raised on legs, nor did it mark a private area. Instead, straw was spread across one section of the floor, usually along the walls, forming a kind of communal sleeping platform. At night, the household lay side by side, turning the very structure of the home into a resting place. In winter, extra straw was heaped to add warmth. In summer, thinner layers kept the body cooler. Sometimes animal skins were added on top, though these too carried their own smells and insects. Thus, the bed was not furniture. It was architecture. It was part of the very house itself. Insects, ash, and fire straw beds, though practical, came with challenges. Insects thrived in the layers and fleas spread quickly. To manage this, people often sprinkled ash and charcoal from the hearth across their bedding. These materials dried out the straw, discouraged pests, and gave a faint smell of smoke. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of such ash layers in ancient huts. To the modern mind, this might seem unpleasant, but for early farmers, the faint dust of ash was a barrier against discomfort, a small measure of control over the creeping life that shared their dwellings. The fire nearby added its own complications. Smoke drifted across the straw at night, stinging the eyes, filling the lungs, and yet, without it, the cold would bite too deeply. The farmer slept in a haze of warmth, smoke, and crackling embers. The bed of straw was not isolated from the fire, but tied to it. The two existed in balance, fire for warmth, straw for rest. The rhythm of sleep and work. Life was not divided into 8 hours of work and 8 hours of sleep. Instead, the farmer's rhythm followed the sun and the seasons. During planting and harvest, days stretched long. Fatigue pressed heavily on the body, and sleep was deep, even if interrupted. In winter, with shorter days, there was more time for rest, though the cold made it fitful. The straw bed reflected this rhythm. It was not a place of luxury, but of recovery. It bore the weight of exhaustion. It held the sweat and dust of the fields. Each night it absorbed the sighs of a weary household, the murmurs of children, the restless shifting of bodies. And in the stillness of midnight, during that strange period between first and second sleep, people sometimes woke to stoke the fire, tend to animals, or whisper in the dark. The straw creaked softly beneath them, a constant reminder of their fragile comfort. The smell of straw and the memory of fields. There's something else to imagine here. The smell. Straw carried with it the scent of harvest, the echo of fields cut and gathered. It was dry, earthy, faintly sweet. At night, when the air cooled and the hearth smoldered, this smell surrounded the sleeper. It was the smell of work completed, of survival stored for the months ahead. The straw beneath one's body was not just bedding, it was also a reminder of labor, of the bond between land and life. When flattened or fouled, it was replaced, carried out and spread on fields again as manure. Thus, the bed was temporary, part of a cycle that tied human rest directly to agriculture itself. Every bed was a link in the chain of survival. The forgotten weight of sleep. We rarely think of sleep as heavy, but for Neolithic farmers, rest carried weight. The weight of tools leaned against the wall, of animals shifting in the dark, of hunger never far away. The straw was thin, and beneath it lay the hard earth. Bones ached, backs stiffened. Yet there was little choice. Some researchers believe that sleep may have been lighter, more easily broken, precisely because of these conditions. Perhaps this is why families slept together, to share warmth and watchfulness. In this way, the straw bed was not just for the individual, it was for the group. It represented safety in numbers, even during the vulnerable hours of night. A question left open. So, when we picture these early farmers, lying side by side, wrapped in skins, breathing in smoke and straw, we see not comfort, but survival. But here another thought rises, slow and unresolved. Did the simple roughness of such beds make rest more precious? Did farmers of the Neolithic, in their hard straw nests, value each moment of sleep in a way we no longer can? The answer lies buried in time, never fully known. Section 3. Sleeping on Straw. The quiet rest of Neolithic farmers. The story of sleep is in many ways the story of being human. And when we look back to the Neolithic farmer lying on straw, we see the first step in a long journey. A journey that begins with earth and stalks and slowly moves toward wooden frames, woven mats, wool-stuffed sacks, and eventually, the soft mattresses we know today. But in that beginning, in those forgotten beds of straw, there is a quiet lesson. The continuity of straw. Even after the Neolithic age passed, straw never disappeared. Across centuries, in villages from Europe to Asia, straw beds remained the common choice for farmers and peasants. It was abundant, disposable, and useful long after it had served as bedding. Medieval peasants in Europe still filled their mattresses with straw. In Japan, straw mats called tatami shaped not just rest, but culture itself. In Egypt, reed and straw mats remained the poor farmer's bed for thousands of years. The Neolithic farmer, resting on straw, had unknowingly set a pattern that endured, a pattern where sleep was not separate from work, but a continuation of it. The bed was never a luxury. It was the residue of labor, carried from field to floor. The human body against the earth. One of the striking truths of early farmers' sleep is its closeness to the earth. Even with straw, the body never lifted far from the ground. Rest happened inches above soil, in contact with its coolness, its dampness, its insects. To us, this may feel unclean, even harsh, but to the Neolithic mind, it was natural. The earth grew food. The earth held ancestors. The earth absorbed waste. And at night, the earth carried the body into rest. Perhaps this closeness shaped a different relationship with the land. Not as something distant, but as something always present, touching skin even in dreams. The fragility of sleep. The Neolithic farmer's sleep was fragile. It depended on fire not dying in the night, on animals not stirring too loudly, on straw not attracting too many pests, on weather not breaking through the thin walls of huts. This fragility made sleep lighter, more alert. It was not a deep escape, but a careful balance between rest and readiness. a balance that may feel unfamiliar to us, but which defined survival for thousands of years. And yet, fragile though it was, this sleep was enough. With dawn came work, and with dusk came rest, and life continued. Echoes in modern beds. If you pause for a moment and think of your own bed, soft, raised, quiet, you might not imagine it connected to straw on an earthen floor. But the connection is there. The pillow beneath your head echoes the skins placed atop straw. The mattress beneath you recalls the packed layers of stalks. Even the seasonal changing of sheets carries faint memory of the farmer sweeping out old straw and replacing it with fresh. Modern sleep feels separate from survival. But in truth, every bed we rest upon carries a faint shadow of those early straw nests. A thought to carry forward. So, what is left of this story? Just the image of tired farmers lying down on straw, their bodies pressed close, their breath rising into the smoky air of a one-room hut? Perhaps. But perhaps also something more. A reminder that sleep, for most of human history, was not about comfort, but about endurance. That the bed was not a sanctuary of luxury, but a tool of survival. And as you imagine them drifting into their first sleep, waking at midnight and lying down again for their second, you may ask yourself a final quiet question. Do we, in our comfort, sleep more deeply? Or did those who lay on straw, in their closeness to earth and exhaustion, know a kind of rest we have already forgotten? The answer is lost to time, gently buried beneath the fields where the straw once grew. Story 2, Section 1. Wool, Reeds, and Clay, the Forgotten Beds of Mesopotamia. Close your eyes and picture the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This was Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, where farming grew into cities, and cities gave birth to writing, trade, and temples. But amid the rise of kings and ziggurats, there was something far quieter, almost invisible in the grand stories of history. It was the way ordinary farmers slept. For just as in the Neolithic, rest remained simple, and the bed was not a luxury but a necessity. Clay houses and reed mats, the homes of Mesopotamian farmers were built of clay bricks baked in the sun. Their walls were thick, their roofs flat, and their interiors cool during the blazing summers. Inside, the floors were hard, sometimes smoothed clay, sometimes simply packed earth. To rest upon such surfaces, people spread mats woven from reeds. Reeds grew abundantly along the rivers, and they were cut, dried, and tied into flat sheets. During the day, these mats served as seating, work surfaces, or even as coverings for goods. At night, they became beds. The reed mat was the poor man's bed. It was thin, hard, and easily worn out, but it kept the sleeper just above the dirt and gave a flat surface on which to lie. Sometimes bundles of reeds were stacked to create thicker mats, which offered a little more comfort, though never much. In a land where reeds were as common as the air itself, this was the bed of the majority. Wool and status. But Mesopotamia was not only reeds and clay. It was also the home of sheep, and with sheep came wool. For wealthier families, wool was used to stuff cushions or cover mats, creating softer layers for sleep. Texts from the period mention woolen blankets, prized for their warmth in the cool nights. The farmer's simple reed mat might be covered with a woolen cloth, while the noble's household could afford larger cushions, sometimes embroidered, sometimes dyed. Yet, even here, the line between luxury and necessity was thin. Wool was valuable, often traded, and not always abundant enough to spare for sleeping. For many, it remained clothing by day, and only occasionally bedding by night. The night in a Mesopotamian village. Imagine the farmer's home at night. The clay walls hold the warmth of the day, slowly releasing it into the air. The reed mat is rolled out along the floor, perhaps with a thin blanket or skin atop it. The family gathers, parents, children, even grandparents, lying side by side in the single-room house. Outside, donkeys bray faintly. The irrigation canals trickle in the distance. A neighbor's dog barks once, then falls silent. The farmer, weary from tending barley fields and carrying water jars, lies down, feeling the uneven texture of reeds beneath their back. It is not comfortable, but it is rest. The problem of heat. Mesopotamian summers were brutally hot. To lie inside a clay house was to sweat, even at night. For this reason, many farmers carried their mats onto the flat roofs of their homes when the air grew unbearable. There, beneath the open sky, families lay out together on reed mats, waiting for breezes from the river. Stars burned brightly above, and the faint glow of temple fires marked the horizon. Sleep came slowly, sometimes interrupted by mosquitoes or the noise of animals, but it came nonetheless. And when dawn broke, the roof became a place of rising, of stretching, of beginning another day. Forgotten fragility. To us, the reed mat may seem too harsh, too fragile, too poor a substitute for what we call a bed, but for the farmer of Mesopotamia, it was enough. A mat could be replaced. A mat could be rolled and carried. A mat could serve many purposes. It was both tool and rest, woven into the daily rhythm of survival. The clay house, the reed mat, the woolen cover, these were the forgotten elements of Mesopotamian sleep, ordinary, unrecorded, and yet central to life. A question unanswered. And so, when we think of Mesopotamia, we remember the kings and the cuneiform tablets, the ziggurats and the laws of Hammurabi. But perhaps we should also think of the farmer lying down at night on a mat of reeds, staring at the clay ceiling, listening to the hum of the rivers. And the quiet question comes to mind. Did the farmer of Mesopotamia, sleeping on a hard reed mat beneath a hot sky, dream of rivers, or of fields, or of something more? The answer drifts away, as forgotten as the mats themselves. Section 2. Wool, Reeds, and Clay. The Forgotten Beds of Mesopotamia. The story of the Mesopotamian bed does not end with reeds and clay floors. It winds deeper into the details of daily life, the burdens of the seasons, and the quiet struggles of rest in a land that gave birth to cities. The reed, a plant of many uses. The reed was everywhere in Mesopotamia. It grew thick along the rivers, bending in the wind, whispering in low rustles. To the farmer, it was not just a plant, but a companion. It became baskets for carrying grain. It became roofs for shade. It became fences for animals. And at night, it became the bed. The reed mat carried with it the smell of water and silt. It was faintly rough, with edges that scratched the skin. But to lie on reeds was to lie on the river itself, for every stalk had grown in its mud. Rest in Mesopotamia was inseparable from the rivers, from the reeds, from the slow turning of water into life. Clay walls, clay floors, clay beds. Clay was another constant. Bricks of clay held up the house. Jars of clay stored the grain. The floor itself was clay packed down by countless feet. In some homes, benches or low platforms of clay were built into the walls, serving as raised areas for sleeping. Upon these clay platforms, reed mats were spread. The clay kept the surface cool, especially in the burning heat of summer, but in winter it turned cold and damp, making rest more difficult. Farmers adjusted by adding skins, wool, or extra mats, layering thin comfort over the unyielding clay. Thus, the bed was never separate from the house. It was part of the same material, the same mud drawn from the river banks dried by the sun and returned again when walls crumbled. The burden of work and the need for rest. A farmer's day in Mesopotamia was heavy with labor. Irrigation canals demanded constant maintenance. Fields of barley needed tending. Animals required care, and always the sun pressed down, unrelenting. When evening came, the farmer's body was sore. The reed mat was not soft, but the exhaustion of the day made even its hardness bearable. To sleep on reeds was not to seek comfort, it was to surrender to fatigue. And yet this surrender was fragile. Noise from animals, cries from children, and the heat of the night broke sleep easily. The farmer did not sleep deeply. He slept lightly, in fragments, always ready to wake. Wool and warmth. When winter came, the reed mat alone was not enough. Nights grew cold, winds carried dust, and the body shivered against the clay walls. In these months, wool became essential. Sheep provided fleece, spun into yarn, woven into cloth. Families draped woolen blankets over themselves, layering warmth atop the reed mat. To wrap in wool was to find a brief barrier against the cold. The fibers held heat, carried the faint smell of sheep, and wore down slowly with use. For the poor, a single blanket might cover an entire family. For the rich, multiple layers of wool brought luxury, decorated with dyes and patterns. The same wool that clothed the body by day guarded it by night. Sleep was stitched together from the work of sheep, reeds, and clay. Roofs and open skies. The roof was another bed. Made of reeds, mud, and wood, it was flat, sturdy enough to hold families during hot summer nights. Many farmers carried their mats up ladders, unrolling them under the stars. On the roof, the air was cooler. Breezes came more freely. The cries of animals mixed with the sounds of distant water. And above, the stars burned brightly, patterns that later inspired Mesopotamian astronomers. But for the farmer, these stars were not a science. They were the silent ceiling of sleep. He lay on his mat, feeling the roughness beneath him, listening to the night insects, watching constellations turn slowly overhead. Sleep came lightly, broken by mosquitoes, but it came. The fragile division of class beds also reflected social division. A noble might have cushions stuffed with wool, dyed fabrics, and raised wooden frames. A farmer, in contrast, had reeds and clay. Yet both lay down at night, both listened to the same dog's bark, both felt the same cool winds on the roof. In sleep, differences softened, though they never disappeared entirely. Even in rest, society left its marks. A question without answer. And so, as we imagine the Mesopotamian farmer, his reed mat thin, his wool blanket worn, his clay walls close, another quiet thought lingers. Did he, as he drifted into light sleep, ever envy the beds of the rich? Or was rest itself, no matter how rough, enough to carry him through? We do not know. The mats have long since crumbled. The wool has rotted. The clay has returned to dust. Only the memory remains. Section 3. Wool, reeds, and clay, the forgotten beds of Mesopotamia. When we think of Mesopotamia, our minds go to temples, kings, and tablets pressed with cuneiform script. But history is never built on rulers alone. It rests quietly on the daily lives of farmers, families, and their forgotten beds. The longevity of reeds. The reed mat, simple and fragile, endured far beyond Mesopotamia. In Egypt, mats of papyrus served the same role. In India, woven mats cooled the body during hot nights. Even in parts of Europe, straw and reeds formed the basis of bedding for peasants long after empires rose and fell. Mesopotamian farmers, lying down on reed mats at night, were part of a much larger tradition, one that stretched across continents and centuries. The reed, cut from riversides, woven by hand, and flattened beneath the body, became humanity's shared bed. It was not luxury. It was survival. Clay as the foundation of rest. The clay platforms found in Mesopotamian houses remind us that sleep was tied directly to the earth. Unlike wooden frames or raised beds of later eras, these were permanent structures built into the house itself. On them, the reed mats were unrolled, wool blankets spread, and families lay together. The bed was not movable, not private, not decorative. It was simply part of the house, like the hearth or the storage jar. In this, we see again that the bed was never an invention of comfort. It was a space, carved out of necessity, pressed into daily rhythm. The shared body of the household. Perhaps the most striking detail of Mesopotamian rest was its togetherness. Families did not scatter into separate rooms. They lay together, side by side, across reed mats on the floor or rooftop. The warmth of one body was shared with another. Children nestled between parents. Grandparents slept within reach of the youngest. Privacy was almost unknown. And in this closeness, the bed became more than straw or wool. It became a network of survival, where warmth, safety, and vigilance were shared. Rest was not individual. It was collective. Wool, as memory wool, too, carried its quiet weight. It connected the farmer to his animals, to the sheep he herded by day and sheared by season. To wrap in wool at night was to wrap in labor, in relationship, in the turning cycle of life. Even today, when we speak of wool blankets, we carry forward this ancient memory. A farmer in Mesopotamia, closing his eyes beneath the weight of wool, left behind an inheritance that lingers in every folded blanket we use. Echoes in modern beds. You may not think of reeds when you lie down tonight. You may not imagine clay walls or open rooftops. Yet, your bed is a descendant of theirs. The cushion beneath you, the blanket above you, the very act of lying down after work, these are echoes of Mesopotamian life. The difference lies only in degree. They lay upon reeds. We lie upon springs and foam. They looked at stars from rooftops. We look at glowing screens. But the essence, the surrender to rest, the fragility of the night, the hope of waking to another day, remains unchanged. A quiet, closing question. So, when you picture Mesopotamia, try not only to see the ziggurat or the cuneiform tablet. Try also to see the farmer at night, unrolling his mat, placing a thin wool blanket across his children and lying back against the clay wall. And perhaps ask yourself, when the rivers whispered through the reeds and the stars turned slowly above, did sleep feel deeper for them? Or is it only our imagination that makes it so? No one can say for certain. The reeds have withered. The wool has faded. The clay has crumbled. But the memory of their forgotten beds drifts quietly on, like the rivers that once sustained them. Story 3, Section 1. The Egyptian. Reed mats beneath the stars. When night fell along the Nile, the world turned soft and blue. The river, swollen with the day's light, glowed faintly under the moon. The air was still, carrying only the distant sound of frogs and the low cry of night birds. And in the villages scattered along the river banks, families prepared to sleep. A bed of reeds. For most Egyptians, the bed was not carved wood or gilded frame. It was a mat, woven from reeds, papyrus, or rushes, rolled out upon the floor. These mats were light, portable, and endlessly practical. By day, they could be rolled up, stored against a wall, or even carried to the fields. By night, they became the simple surface on which life's fatigue gave way to rest. They were not soft in the way we think of softness today. The reeds, though woven tightly, retained a firmness, a slight roughness. Yet, for bodies accustomed to hard labor under the Egyptian sun, they were enough. And in this simplicity, there was a quiet kind of dignity. The rooftop ritual. As in Mesopotamia, sleep was often taken not just within walls, but upon rooftops. In summer, the heat of the day lingered long after sunset, trapped within clay walls. To remain indoors was to suffocate. So, families climbed narrow stairways to their flat roofs and unrolled mats beneath the vast desert sky. There, on high, the Nile's breeze cooled the skin. Children fell asleep listening to the hum of insects. Parents lay back, watching the slow march of constellations that had guided boats and farmers alike. The rooftop became more than a bed. It became a window to eternity. the bed, and the gods. For the Egyptians, sleep was not merely physical. It was spiritual, tied to the great cycle of death and rebirth. To lie down upon a mat was, in a way, to practice dying. The body surrendered, stilled, wrapped in cloth, awaiting awakening. The gods themselves were imagined as resting upon cosmic beds. Osiris lay upon his funerary bier, a symbol of eternal sleep and rebirth. Ra, the sun god, was thought to journey through the night, only to awaken again at dawn. Thus, even the humble reed mat carried a symbolic weight. Each night's sleep was a rehearsal for eternity. Each morning's rising was a resurrection. Wealth and difference. Of course, not all Egyptians slept upon reed mats. The wealthy carved wooden beds, often raised upon lion-shaped legs, strung with woven cord, and covered in linen. Some were gilded, decorated, or shaped to reflect divine symbols. But for the majority, the mat remained the true bed of Egypt. A thin roll of reeds upon packed earth, a single pillow of bundled cloth, a wool or linen covering, depending on the season. The contrast is striking, yet it tells us something important. Even when gold and wood marked the lives of the rich, the foundation of Egyptian rest remained tied to reeds pulled from the river. A night beside the Nile. Imagine, then, an ordinary farmer. His hands are calloused, his back bent from bending over the flooded fields. He returns home as the sun sets, eats a small meal of bread and onions, and climbs the steps to his roof. There, his wife unrolls the reed mats. Their children tumble down onto them, whispering, laughing, and finally drifting to silence. The stars shimmer overhead, reflected faintly in the black water of the Nile. The farmer lies back, closes his eyes, and lets the cool night air wash over him. The mat beneath him is rough, but it does not matter. The day is gone. The night has claimed him. And in that stillness beneath the ancient sky, he joins the countless generations who found rest not in luxury, but in reeds, stars, and silence. Section 2. The symbolism of sleep in Egyptian belief. The Egyptian night was never just darkness. It was mystery, filled with the unseen hands of gods and spirits. And within this quiet world, sleep took on meanings that went far beyond simple rest. Dreams as divine messages. To the Egyptians, sleep opened the gates between the human and divine. When the body lay still upon its mat, the spirit wandered, stepping into the dream world where gods could speak. A simple farmer might dream of a flood that promised rich harvest. A scribe might dream of Thoth, the god of wisdom, guiding his hand. A priest might dream of the temple itself glowing with sacred fire. Dreams were not dismissed as idle fancies. They were studied, recorded, and interpreted. Entire papyri, such as the Chester Beatty Dream Book, were devoted to the art of reading the symbols of dreams. And so, the reed mat was more than a bed. It was a threshold, a place where the ordinary person could receive divine whispers in the stillness of the night. The ritual of lying down. The act of lying down itself carried meaning. To stretch out flat upon a mat was to imitate the gods who rested in eternity. Osiris, god of the afterlife, was shown reclining upon his bier, wrapped like a sleeper awaiting awakening. Pharaohs, too, were depicted upon ceremonial beds, their bodies prepared for eternal rest. Even the funerary couches placed in tombs were shaped like everyday beds, suggesting that death was but an endless night of sleep, and that the afterlife was simply a continuation of the nightly rhythm. Thus, each evening, as Egyptians unrolled their mats, they were not only preparing to sleep, they were enacting a miniature version of death and rebirth. The sacred materials of sleep. The materials themselves carried meaning. Reeds and papyrus drawn from the Nile symbolized renewal and life. Each mat was woven from plants that grew, withered, and grew again, echoing the endless cycle of the sun and the afterlife. Linen sheets, when used, held purity. Linen was associated with ritual cleanliness, with mummification, with the wrapping of holy statues. To sleep, wrapped in linen, was to echo the gods themselves. Even the choice of pillows, simple headrests of carved wood, spoke of order and permanence. Unlike soft stuffing, wood endured. It lifted the head as if to keep the sleeper half awake, halfway between the world of men and the world of gods. The difference between night and day. For Egyptians, the rhythm of sleep was tied to the rhythm of the Nile and the sun. At dawn, Ra rose, bringing light and life. At dusk, Ra sank, traveling through the underworld in his solar bark. The night was therefore not just darkness, but the dangerous journey of the sun god through chaos. To sleep was to align oneself with this cosmic voyage, hoping to awaken as Ra did each morning. In this sense, every mat, every bed, every slumber carried a cosmic weight. The farmer lying on his rooftop, the child drifting into dreams, the noble reclining upon a carved couch, all participated in the nightly cycle of death, danger, and resurrection. The forgotten silence. What strikes us most today is the silence of it all. No clocks, no glowing screens, no hum of machinery. Only the slow settling of birds, the whisper of reeds in the river, and the deep rhythm of breathing. This silence was not empty. It was filled with meaning. To the Egyptians, it was the silence of the gods watching, the silence of Ra's journey, the silence of Osiris waiting in the shadows. And so, as they lay down upon their mats, Egyptians did not only sleep. They entered into a sacred drama that repeated itself night after night, age after age. But what of those who could not sleep? Yet one must wonder, what happened to those who struggled with rest? What of the farmer tossing in the heat, or the mother kept awake by crying children, or the scribe whose mind would not quiet? Did they see their unrest as a failing? Did they believe they had displeased the gods? Or did they simply endure the long hours, staring into the stars, waiting for dawn to bring its renewal? The records do not tell us. But in this silence there lingers an unresolved question, one that connects us still to them across time. Section 3. The Legacy of Egyptian Sleep and its Reflection in Our Lives. Today, the nights along the Nile are long gone. The reed mats have decayed, the rooftops collapsed, and the people who once lay beneath the stars are now dust within their tombs. And yet their habits of sleep still whisper to us across the centuries. The everyday that endures. The reed mat, so ordinary in its time, is a reminder that most of life is not made of monuments, but of simple things. It is not the Pharaoh's golden throne that carried the people through each night, but the woven mats pulled from the riverbanks. This is the forgotten history, the quiet foundation beneath the grandeur, the bed that supported the farmer, the scribe, the craftsman, the mat that endured the sweat of the day and the stillness of the night. In remembering these humble details, we see the Egyptians not as distant figures, but as people who lay down each night with tired bodies and heavy minds, hoping, like us, to find rest. The echo of spiritual sleep. We also inherit their way of seeing sleep as something larger. They did not dismiss it as an interruption in life. They framed it as a journey, a rehearsal, a reflection of the eternal rhythm of death and rebirth. And though we may no longer believe in Ra's voyage through the underworld, or Osiris reclining in eternal stillness, we can still sense the wisdom of their view, that sleep is not a loss of time, but a participation in something greater than ourselves. Even today, when you close your eyes, you step into a rhythm older than civilization itself. The modern rooftop. Few of us sleep upon rooftops now. Few of us roll out mats of reeds, and yet many still long for open air, for the sight of stars above, for the coolness of night breezes. Perhaps this longing is not new, but ancient, woven into us by countless generations who lived before walls and electric lamps, who found comfort in the vast sky's embrace. In every summer night when you lie awake wishing for open air, you are echoing an Egyptian farmer, long forgotten, who did the same. The gentle lesson of the mat. What, then, is the legacy of Egyptian sleep? Perhaps it is this, that rest does not need to be ornate to be meaningful, that a mat of reeds, firm and plain, was enough to cradle generations of weary bodies, that the night sky, silent and eternal, was enough to comfort restless minds. And perhaps, too, the lesson is one of humility, that the beds of kings may glitter, but it is the mats of farmers that carried the weight of civilization itself. A final reflection. So tonight, when you lie down upon your own bed, consider this. You too are part of the same human rhythm. The Egyptians rested upon their mats, the Mesopotamians upon their rooftops, and you, in your own time, follow the same path of surrender. Different beds, different worlds, but the same closing of eyes, the same breathing in the dark, the same longing for peace beneath stars that have watched us all. And perhaps in that moment of drifting you will feel a small connection, not to pharaohs or gods, but to the forgotten farmers of Egypt whose humble mats remind us that sleep itself is the great equalizer softening the burdens of every age. Story 4, Section 1. The Straw Beds of Medieval Europe. When night fell across medieval Europe, darkness came heavy and absolute. The flicker of tallow candles soon died, leaving homes wrapped in silence, broken only by the sigh of wind against wooden shutters or the muffled low of animals in the byre, and within these simple houses, farmers and their families prepared for bed. A bed of straw. For most peasants there was no carved wooden frame, no linen sheets, no downy pillows. Their bed was a sack, roughly stitched from coarse fabric, filled with straw. The word mattress itself comes from an old word meaning a thing thrown down. And indeed, this was all it was, a bundle of dried grass placed upon the floor, sometimes shared by several family members. Straw beds were practical. They were cheap, easily gathered after harvest, and easily replaced when dirtied. They were, in truth, as disposable as the crops from which they came, but they were also imperfect. The straw prickled against the skin. It grew dusty. It attracted vermin. Within weeks, it grew musty and flat, demanding replacement. Yet for millions of medieval farmers, this was what rest meant, not comfort, but necessity. The shared sleep. Medieval families often shared beds, not out of choice, but survival. A family of 5 might crowd upon a single straw mattress, huddled together for warmth during the bitter European winters. Parents slept beside children, brothers beside sisters. Sometimes even servants or travelers were welcomed into the same bed. Privacy was scarce, but warmth was vital. The bed was not only a place of rest, it was a place of survival. Body heat was as important as blankets, and so sleep became a communal act. The position of the bed. The bed itself was rarely in a separate room. In the simplest homes, it lay in the same space where food was cooked, eaten, and shared. Often, animals were kept nearby, their warmth helping to heat the small room. Thus, the farmer might drift to sleep with the faint smell of smoke, the rustle of straw, and the quiet shifting of livestock. To us, it may seem harsh, but to them, this closeness, human and animal alike, was the fabric of life itself. Straw and symbolism. Though humble, the straw bed carried symbolic weight. It reminded people of the nativity story, of Christ himself said to be born in a manger of straw. The poorest peasants could therefore look upon their own bed and see in it a reflection of holy humility. At the same time, straw carried connotations of transience. It withered quickly. It was fragile, impermanent. Sleeping upon it was a daily reminder of the fleeting nature of life itself. A winter's night. Imagine, then, a farmer in a cold stone cottage. The day's work has left his muscles sore, his hands raw from tools and frost. He eats a small meal of pottage, drinks a cup of ale, and prepares for rest. The straw mattress awaits him, flat in places, uneven in others. He lies down beside his family, pulling a coarse wool blanket over them all. The straw pricks his skin, and he shifts, trying to find comfort. The air smells faintly of animals, of wood smoke, of damp. And then, slowly, the day fades. The harshness of life recedes, and sleep, indifferent to comfort, claims him at last. An unresolved question. Yet, one must wonder, did the farmers of Europe dream of softer beds? Did they envy the lords and ladies who slept upon feather mattresses, draped in fine linen? Or did they, hardened by toil, find in straw all the rest they needed? The records do not tell us. And so we are left with this quiet question, drifting unanswered across the centuries. Section 2. The life, symbolism, and problems of straw beds. The straw mattress was not just an object, it was a cycle, a rhythm, woven into the seasons of medieval life. To understand it is to glimpse the hidden fabric of everyday survival. The seasonal bed. Straw was gathered after harvest, bundled, and stored. When winter approached, families would stuff their mattresses anew, filling rough sacks with the golden remains of the field. But straw does not last. After a few weeks, it broke down under the weight of bodies. It flattened, lost its spring, and grew damp with sweat. Within months, it became a bed of dust and husks. Farmers replaced it as they could, yet often families endured months on flattened, uncomfortable bedding before the next harvest. Thus, the bed itself was tied to the cycle of crops, another reminder that medieval life bent always to the rhythm of the land. Vermin in the mattress. The straw mattress was not only a place of rest, it was a home for others. Mice nested within it. Fleas and lice thrived. Bedbugs, too, found ample hiding places among the stalks. For peasants, this was not unusual. They accepted it as part of life. Scratching in the night or shaking out the mattress to drive pests away was ordinary. To us, it might sound unbearable. To them, it was simply the cost of sleep. The smell of sleep. The straw bed carried its own smell, earthy, musty, mingled with the sweat of labor. In damp cottages, the straw absorbed moisture, becoming heavy with the scent of mold. And yet, even this smell was familiar, perhaps even comforting. It was the smell of the field carried into the home, a reminder of harvest, of survival. For the medieval farmer, comfort was not softness, but familiarity. To sleep upon straw was to sleep upon the land itself. A symbol of poverty and humility. In medieval writings, straw beds often symbolized poverty. Nobles contrasted their feather beds with the peasants' straw, seeing in it the lowliness of common life. Yet the Church sometimes praised this humility. Monks slept upon straw, rejecting the softness of feathers. They saw hardship as a path to holiness, and the straw bed as a constant reminder of Christ's humble birth. Thus, the bed was not only physical, it carried moral meaning, shaping how people thought about wealth, virtue, and sacrifice. The contrast of wealth. Feather beds existed in the same world. In castles and noble homes, mattresses were stuffed with goose down, layered with fine linen, covered in embroidered cloth. The contrast was stark. Peasants on straw, nobles on feathers. Yet even nobles sometimes used straw as underbedding, spreading it beneath their richer mattresses for warmth. This overlap reminds us that though divided by wealth, all medieval people were still tied to the same earth, the same harvest, the same material of survival. A soft cliffhanger. But what did this mean for health? What did centuries of sleeping upon straw do to bodies, to comfort, to the rhythms of life itself? The answer is not simple. And to uncover it, we must look closer at the effects both good and bad, that straw beds left upon those who depended upon them. Section 3. The long-term legacy of straw beds and their meaning for us. Today, the straw beds of medieval Europe have long since disappeared. The sacks have rotted, the straw turned to dust. Yet their memory lingers, woven into the fabric of human history, reminding us that rest in every age is shaped not by luxury, but by survival. The body on straw. Sleeping on straw shaped the bodies of medieval people. The mattresses were uneven, firm in some places, sagging in others. Spines bent to the land just as labor bent them by day. Pain, discomfort, and restlessness must have been common, yet these people endured because life offered no alternative. It is easy to forget this today when our own beds are soft, layered, designed for comfort. For them, the bed was never about luxury. It was about enduring one more night so that the work of the next day could begin. The spiritual lesson. The straw bed carried with it a quiet lesson. It reminded medieval farmers of humility, of their closeness to the land, of their dependence on harvests. It reminded monks of simplicity and sacrifice, linking hardship to holiness. And it reminded everyone of mortality, for straw crumbles quickly, just as life itself fades. Each bed, therefore, was a meditation in itself. Not consciously, perhaps, but in its roughness and fragility, it whispered the same truth. Nothing lasts. From straw to spring. Over centuries, bedding slowly changed. By the Renaissance, wealthier homes moved toward wool, feathers, and eventually spring-based mattresses. Straw remained the bed of the poor, but the seeds of change were planted. And yet, for hundreds of years, straw endured, generation after generation laying their heads upon the same kind of bed. When we look back, it is striking. The straw bed lasted longer in human history than the modern mattress has yet existed. The modern reflection. What then can we learn from these forgotten beds? Perhaps that comfort is not the essence of sleep. The peasants of Europe, weary from toil, found rest even upon prickling straw. They awoke each morning, returned to their fields, and endured. And perhaps we, in our age of comfort, might pause to remember that sleep is not granted by softness alone. It is granted by the body's surrender, by the mind's willingness to let go, by the simple rhythm of closing one's eyes against the night. A shared humanity. Tonight, when you lie upon your bed, be it memory foam, springs, or feathers, remember the long chain of sleepers before you. Remember the medieval family huddled together upon straw. Remember the farmer scratching at fleas in the night. Remember the monk resting upon straw as an act of discipline. And know that in every age, in every form, sleep has been the one common act that binds us. Different beds, different worlds, but the same surrender, the same breath, the same silence, the same drifting into night. Story 5, Section 1. The Tatami Nights of Ancient Japan. When dusk fell upon ancient Japan, the light softened into shades of gold and shadow. Lanterns flickered in wooden homes, paper screens glowed faintly, and the world slowed into silence. And upon the floor of these homes lay something both ordinary and sacred. Tatami. The tatami mat. Tatami were woven from rice straw, tightly bound, forming smooth rectangular mats. They were soft enough to kneel upon, firm enough to sleep upon, and central to Japanese life for centuries. Unlike in Europe or Egypt, where beds were separate objects, in Japan the floor itself became the bed. At night, a thin futon was laid across the tatami, along with a small pillow. In the morning, the futon was folded away, leaving the room open once again. Thus, the act of sleeping was woven into the rhythm of living space itself. A bed that was also a floor. Tatami did not serve one purpose alone. It was floor, seat, and bed all in one. By day, people sat and ate upon it. By night, they rested upon it. Its texture, faintly rough yet yielding, carried the scent of straw. To lie down upon it was to connect not to luxury, but to the earth itself, through the rice plants that had nourished the land and the people alike. In this way, the tatami bed carried both practicality and symbolism. The household at night. Imagine a Japanese household of the Heian period. The day's activities are finished. Paper doors are closed, shutting out the night. The air smells faintly of wood and straw. The family unrolls futons across the tatami floor. Children whisper quietly, drifting into sleep. The head of the household lies back, hands folded, listening to the distant chirp of crickets. The room is simple. No clutter, no excess. Only mats, blankets, silence, and the faint glow of the moon filtering through the screens. It is, in its own way, a perfect stillness. The spiritual dimension. Tatami carried more than physical use. It carried symbolic meaning. In Shinto and Buddhist traditions, purity was central. Tatami, fresh and clean, represented order and harmony. Shoes never touched them, for the mats were sacred spaces tied to the rhythm of ritual as well as daily life. To sleep upon tatami, therefore, was to place one's body within a sacred order, aligning rest with purity and balance. A question beneath the stillness. Yet one must wonder, did the firmness of the tatami bring true comfort? Did those who slept upon it dream differently, shaped by its simplicity? Or was its power less in softness and more in the calm it brought to the mind? The records leave us only hints. And so, we are left to imagine, drifting with them into silence. Section 2. The rituals, symbolism, and daily rhythms of tatami sleep. The tatami mat was never just a place to rest. It was part of a greater rhythm, a slow turning of daily life where space, body, and spirit aligned in quiet order. Folding away the night. In Japan, the bed did not stay fixed in one corner, as in the homes of Europe or Mesopotamia. Instead, every evening the futon was unrolled, and every morning it was folded neatly away. This ritual was more than convenience. It was discipline, a way of keeping life uncluttered. The act of folding bedding at dawn symbolized renewal. Yesterday's rest was complete. Today's work awaited. The tatami floor became, in a sense, a canvas, cleared each morning, painted anew each evening. Tatami and social order. The mats themselves followed rules. Their size was standardized, long before many other societies had considered such uniformity. A single mat measured roughly by the arm span, and rooms were designed according to how many mats could fit. In this way, even architecture bowed to tatami. Rooms were not measured in feet, but in tatami mats. A 6-mat room was humble. A 12-mat room carried more prestige. A grand hall might hold dozens. And where one slept within the room mattered too. The place of honor was the farthest from the door, safe from drafts and intruders. Lower-ranking members of the household slept closer to the entrance, their bodies serving as a shield of loyalty. Thus, even sleep followed the hierarchy of society. Cleanliness and the sacred space tatami, woven of straw, required care. Dusting, sunning, and replacing were part of household duties. A fresh tatami carried a pale green hue and a crisp scent of grass. Over time, it faded to soft brown, polished by countless bare feet, countless nights of sleep. In Shinto shrines, tatami flooring was treated with reverence. To step barefoot upon it was to enter a pure space, free of dirt and impurity. At home, the same principle held true. Shoes never crossed its surface. Thus, to sleep upon tatami was to place the body upon something both practical and sacred. The bed was not separate furniture, but the very foundation of purity within the home. The silence of the night. Japanese nights were filled not with bustling taverns or candlelit chatter, as in medieval Europe, but with quiet restraint. The wooden homes, thin-walled and open to the sounds of nature, echoed with crickets, frogs, and the soft patter of rain. Sleep came early, with the rhythm of the sun. Candles burned quickly, oil was costly, and so the darkness itself encouraged stillness. A family might retire together, futons spread side by side upon the tatami. The young slept closest to warmth. The elderly rested in the places of honor. The floor, wide and unbroken, made sleep a communal experience. Each breath, each turn of the body, belonged to the shared sound of the household. Dreams and discipline. In Buddhism, sleep carried its own moral weight. Too much sleep was considered laziness. Too little risked exhaustion. The middle path, moderation, was taught even here. Monks, too, slept upon simple mats. Their rest was plain, disciplined without excess. To lie upon tatami was to learn humility, to accept both firmness and discomfort as part of life's path. One might ask, did this discipline shape the dreams of those who slept? Were their minds quieter, their spirits steadier, because their beds carried so little excess? The subtle burden of simplicity. Yet within this elegance lay burdens. Tatami absorbed moisture, and in Japan's humid summers this could bring mold, insects, and discomfort. Mats had to be aired in the sun, beaten free of dust, and replaced when worn. The ritual of care was constant. To sleep upon tatami was not effortless. It demanded attention. And so, the very floor beneath one's body became a mirror of discipline. Carelessness brought decay, attention brought purity. An unfinished question. But here lies a quiet thought. Was the simplicity of tatami truly a source of peace, or was it a form of quiet control, guiding households into habits, discipline, and order? In the silence of the Japanese night, as futons lay stretched upon straw, did people rest freely, or did they rest within the patterns that society and tradition demanded? The records cannot answer. They leave us only this question, drifting in the still air of the tatami room. Section 3. The Legacy of Tatami and What It Means for Rest Today. The tatami mat has endured longer than many dynasties, longer than empires, longer than the castles and temples that once stood above it. Even now, in modern Japan, you may step into a room where the floor smells faintly of rice straw, and where the air carries a quiet sense of balance. The mat beneath your feet is not simply decoration. It is the continuation of a story that has stretched across centuries. Tatami in the modern home. In today's Japan, many homes still preserve a single tatami room. It may not be the main sleeping space anymore, but it remains a place of memory, ceremony, or quiet retreat. For some, futons are still unrolled upon the tatami each night, folded away each morning. For others, the mats are used only for sitting, for tea, for visitors. Yet the ritual endures, even as modern beds and sofas fill most other rooms. This quiet persistence reminds us that traditions of rest are never only about comfort. They are about meaning, identity, and the silent continuity between ancestors and descendants. A bed that shaped architecture. Few beds in history have shaped the very design of homes, but tatami did. Rooms were measured in mats, layouts were determined by their placement, and hierarchy within the household was reflected in how the mats were arranged. To sleep upon tatami was to accept one's place within a rhythm larger than oneself. Each mat held not only a sleeper, but also a silent reflection of social order. And yet, this same mat could also be a space of equality, for families sleeping side by side, young and old, sharing the same floor, the same night, the same silence. Tatami and the Philosophy of Restraint. Unlike the grand feather beds of Europe or the carved wooden couches of Rome, tatami was plain. Its value lay in what it was not, extravagant, excessive, or indulgent. This simplicity shaped a culture of restraint where even sleep carried discipline. Comfort came not from layers of luxury, but from alignment with purity and balance. Perhaps that is why tatami has remained, even in a world overflowing with softer, thicker, more indulgent options. It carries a whisper of something deeper, that rest can be found in simplicity, and peace can be drawn from plainness. Echoes in the modern world today, many around the world turn once again toward minimalism, toward simplicity, toward clean spaces free of clutter. In a sense, they rediscover what the Japanese had already lived for centuries. The tatami mat, in its humble form, speaks to this longing. To lie upon it is to return to the ground, to reconnect with a floor that is also a bed, to remember that rest is not about excess, but about presence. It is a reminder that the bed is not only where we sleep, but where we learn how to let go. A quiet takeaway. So tonight, as you listen to this story, imagine yourself lying upon tatami. The straw carries the faint scent of fields. The room is empty, except for stillness. The futon is thin, but enough. Outside, the crickets sing, and the moon glows faintly through the paper screen. It is not indulgent. It is not soft. It is not luxurious. But it is enough. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson of the tatami bed, that in the end, rest does not depend on what we own, but on what we allow ourselves to release. An open question, yet still one wonders, does sleeping upon tatami bring deeper rest, or does it simply teach us to accept less? The answer remains uncertain, left to drift like the sound of insects in the summer night. And so, with the tatami beneath us, and the silence around us, we too drift into the unfinished calm of sleep. Story 6, Section 1. The Grass-braided Beds of the Nile Farmers. The Nile flowed endlessly, its waters steady and patient, carving life into the desert. Upon its banks, farmers bent low among the reeds, harvesting grain, tending cattle, and guiding the water into narrow channels. And when the long day ended, when the light of Ra fell beyond the horizon, these farmers returned to homes of mud brick and thatch, where their beds awaited them. Not carved wood, not soft cushions, but frames of grass, rope, and reed. The simplicity of a Nile bed. For the farmers of ancient Egypt, sleep was not an indulgence. Their beds were practical things, woven from the very plants they harvested. Grasses and reeds, braided into cords, were stretched across wooden or clay supports. The surface was firm, sometimes harsh, but it raised the body above the earth. This mattered deeply in a land where scorpions and snakes shared the night, and where damp ground could carry illness. Thus, the grass-braided bed was not luxury. It was survival. The daily life that led to rest. By day, the farmers' labor was endless. Under the hot Egyptian sun, they plowed with simple tools, guided oxen, and sowed the soil made fertile by the yearly flood. At harvest, they cut wheat and barley, tied bundles, and carried them into storage. Their hands were rough, their backs bent, their skin burned by the sun. When night fell, they sought no grandeur. The bed was a place to lay down weary limbs, to let the body pause before the next dawn. And yet, in that pause, the braided reeds carried them into rest. The household at night. Inside a mud brick house, the air was warm and still. Oil lamps flickered weakly, casting shadows on walls coated with simple plaster. The bed stood in the corner, low, narrow, made of frame and reed. Children sometimes slept on mats upon the floor. Adults lay upon the woven surface, perhaps with a thin linen cloth for cover, the scent of dried grass rising faintly beneath them. There was little softness, but there was order. Each night followed the same rhythm, the quiet murmur of family, the slow extinguishing of lamps, the silence of the desert. Symbolism of the bed. In Egyptian thought, the bed was not only for sleep, it was also linked to death. The act of lying down was tied to the journey of the soul, and funerary beds were placed within tombs, carved or painted, echoing the daily act of rest. Thus, even the simple reed bed carried weight. It was not just a frame for the weary, it was a reflection of the eternal cycle, of rest and rebirth, of waking and dying, of sleep and renewal. An open question in the night. And yet, one must wonder, did the firmness of the grass bring comfort, or did farmers dream of softer rest, envying the cushioned beds of nobles? Did the woven reeds with their rough texture shape their sleep as much as their toil shaped their days? The records are silent. We are left only with the image of a weary body, stretched upon a simple bed, drifting into dreams beside the river that never ceased to flow.